Are you a woman in the corporate world, striving to break barriers, challenge unconscious bias, and lead the way for women in leadership roles globally? If so, this is the podcast for you. Introducing Leading Ladies Who Lunch. The lunch hour is usually the time when colleagues get together for real, honest conversations about work, life, and everything in between. In each episode of Leading Ladies Who Lunch, we'll delve into insightful discussions and share actionable strategies to help you navigate corporate life. Co-hosted by me, Cece George, a leadership development architect and inspirational speaker. I'm thrilled to share my experience and expertise on leadership, mentorship, and organizational intelligence to help you own your career.
And me, Rachel Lowndes, CEO and founder, imposter syndrome expert, and mindset coach at Rachel Lowndes Coaching and Consulting. Passionate about helping women conquer imposter syndrome and unleash their inner confidence to get the recognition and promotions they deserve.
Jam-packed with insightful conversations, expert advice, and inspiring stories from a diverse group, we'll explore how to overcome obstacles, shatter those glass ceilings, and build unshakable mindsets to unlock your true potential. So whether you're sipping a coffee or enjoying a meal at your desk, tune in for a no-host bar lunchtime chat. Episodes will be dropped every 2 weeks. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, one conversation at a time. Welcome back to the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. Now, today we are excited to be joined by a very special male, our very first male guest and special inspiring guest, Thomas Murray. Now, Thomas is a private wealth manager who is employed by high net worth individuals and families to manage their finances. Alongside this, he has started a podcast called The Growth Game and a course teaching the general public the financial fundamentals necessary for a healthy, wealthy life. Thomas, welcome. It's amazing to have you here on the podcast with us today.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a very flattering introduction, and I hope I live up to it.
Well, I am really excited just also because this is our first male guest. We've had a diverse group of women come through here to share their stories and to share with us their lessons learned along their career. So this is really exciting to get that male perspective. So Thomas, welcome.
Great. Hopefully I set a good example for my fellow gendermen.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Now, Thomas, I first came across you on TikTok when I stumbled across the Someone I Work With profile, which, by the way, I loved, like, very smart how your friend Julia put that together, with that kind of intriguing story that she created around, kind of creeping on the hot office man. And, we're all kind of really into the story of, like, is she going to ask him out? Do they like each other? Are they together? It's super cool. So tell us, how does a man from private wealth turn into a TikTok thirst trap sensation? Talk us through the journey of how and why you decided to become an influencer in that sense, and what you have learned in the process, and what surprised you most about what happened with that TikTok success.
Sure. So yeah, it definitely wasn't an overnight decision, and it was something that was kind of decided for me. And I had the choice of call it off or play ball, and obviously decided to let it run and see where it went. So it started with my colleague Julia, who she's worked in the social media space for a long time. She's got 250,000 followers herself on Instagram. And when I joined the company, it was like my third day or something. She said to me that she thought it could be good TikTok content, and would I mind if she filmed me? And what I thought she meant by that is she has a TikTok account and would like to make a video that had me in it. So I said, okay, doing what? She's like, nothing. I'll just film you around the office. And she's quite out there, right? And the first couple of days, I wasn't sure if she was completely crazy or just, a massive extrovert. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. And then she showed me after it had been up a couple of days. She's like, here, look at this. And I realized at that point she'd made a whole account, which was someone I work with. And the video that she filmed me, she'd put on some sexy music over the top as well. But it had actually got like quite a bit of traction.
Yeah.
And I remember just being really shocked at the time, and I couldn't get my head around what it was, because I'd never I was never big on social media, and at this time I had 200 followers on Instagram. I very rarely posted, and I
Yeah.
just definitely never had anywhere near that level of attention. So it obviously gave me a bit of a crisis of ego, um, and had me questioning a lot of things. But it was good. It was exciting, and we decided to see where it went. The company, they saw some potential in it. They liked the idea that it could be used to generate business and generate money, but of course they also worried about how professional it was and if it could damage the brand. So there were points where they tried to pull it back. And Julia, she's very hot-headed, and it was her baby, and any attempts to try and mess with it were met with ferociousness on her part. And yeah, eventually she left the company and moved on. I left the company and moved on. So the TikTok itself, someone I work with, has kind of slowed down a bit now, but it's given me a platform where a lot of people seem to be quite engaged with what I have to say on finance, on personal development, and things like that. So yeah, they're two things that I'm obviously passionate about, and I'm now using that platform to shift into that sort of content rather than the office thirst traps.
Oh, it's so brilliant. It really is. The music was incredible. I was like, that is so smart. But yeah, as you say, it's given you that platform to bounce off.
That's amazing. I
Exactly.
mean, Thomas, you talk about your passion. So did you always have this passion for finance and for sharing your wealth of knowledge in finance with others?
No. So finance, it kind of ties into the personal development story. So when I was 18, I had three choices. I could join the workforce as an unskilled employee, which I tried for 3 months and I didn't like. I could go to university, which just wasn't mature enough at 18 to have gone through with it and completed it. And the third choice is quite a lot of people going traveling. So I did that. I went traveling and I had a good time, as you would obviously expect. And then I just didn't want to go back and face the music of having to go and join the workforce or having to go and start university. So I ended up traveling for 7 years. And when I hit 25, I was still unskilled, uneducated, and I always thought that I was going to be successful in life. But I was starting to come to the realization that the world wasn't going to hand me a living, and I was going to have to earn my success. So at 25, I came back from traveling. I put myself through university at 25 as well and did a fast track course because I felt like I was playing catch up on the world. So I did a 3 year course condensed into 2 years. And then I put myself through my finance qualifications, and I was just a man possessed trying to catch up and get to a position of employment and education that was respectful and would generate me a decent income. So I got through it pretty quickly just because I was so driven. And then since that point, educating on finance hadn't really been something that I'd considered until I had all of these people messaging me, asking me for financial advice. Because the problem with wealth management is that it's designed to help the rich get richer. It's designed to help the high net worth manage their finances. And as a wealth manager, if you have someone come to you and you quickly realize that they don't have enough money for it to be worth the company's time, your job is to get them off the call as quickly as possible and move on to help someone that does. Now, I get that from a commercial point of view because, I could have 5 clients that pay me the same amount as 100 clients, but I have to do 1/20th of the work. So it does make sense why the company set these minimum limitations on what you're allowed to accept. But it did mean that I was having a lot of people reaching out to me needing help, and I was told to get away as quickly as possible. So for me, I wanted to put something out there so that at least I could feel like I was helping people. And if they came to me and say, look, this is the minimum limitations of what I can work with right now. Here is everything I know that you need to know to get yourself started. And then once you reach that level, then you can come to me and I can take over at that point if you like. So that's kind of what led me to do this.
Oh,
That's amazing.
Yeah,
I love that story. I think there's so much of a common thread you hear with people just want to help other people. People just want to give back and share whatever knowledge they've acquired, whatever experience they've gained, share it back as lessons learned for the betterment of someone else. And I think your story is another testament to that, human desire to give back. So it's, really impressive that you're doing this.
Thank you.
You've like
You know,
really identified a gap in the market there as well, because you're right, you know, it's like you're either super, super rich or you're just poor, right? And you're kind of flapping around in the bottom, you know, kind of, you know, your wealth creation strategy is buy property, live in it, pay off your mortgage, and then hope to retire, you know, based on what you've earned, you know, and put into a pension. And then you've got obviously very, very rich people who've got all of this additional money, and they're not necessarily always using their own money. They're shifting money around and whatever.
Mhm.
And it's like, what does it take to get beyond that bottom rung to the top rung? There's no kind of steps, is there?
There's not. And because finance is really rarely taught in schools, I've spoken to a couple of people that said they were, but they're outliers in this situation. And also, I had some friends of mine proofread the course for me. And I thought I'd made it so simple and I was like covering the complete basics. And they were still like, well, why this and why that? And one of them had never heard of compound interest. And I realized that I had to literally build this from the
Yeah.
foundations upwards. There's no point saying, look, this is the beginner. It's like, no, okay, this is everything from the ground upwards
Yeah.
to give people what they need to get started on that front. Because as you say, there's no one that's built a business model that's helping the people to get past those habits, and the habits that they have at the moment are what keep them poor. And there's two examples. Have you heard of Andrew Hallam, the millionaire teacher?
No.
No,
No.
I have
So
not.
as the title tells pretty much the whole story, but he was working as a teacher, and through the right financial habits and investing, he became a multimillionaire, and now, you know, shares the similar sort of insights that I share in book form, and it's quite inspirational to a lot of teachers. There's a guy called Ronald Reed who was a janitor and famously called the millionaire janitor because, again, he was working in an extremely low paid job, but just through having the right financial habits, he built that up. And I just want to be clear with these guys, it's not a case of they invested in a speculative stock and it became a millionaire. It made them millionaires. It's a case of that they just invested consistently into the market as a whole, which is generally what I preach. And that over the course of years and through compound interest elevated them to a point of financial freedom. So you don't have to have a 6 or 7 figure income in order to achieve that level of financial freedom. You just need the right habits in place.
Yeah. Okay.
Brilliant.
That's super interesting because you're right. Like most people don't know these kind of simple strategies, and there are some kind of simple strategies for example, you know, like I've paid off my mortgage really quickly because I developed my own strategy for paying off the mortgage. That no one told me that strategy. I actually just created it myself, which was to split my loan into smaller chunks, and the big loan stayed fixed, the smaller loan stayed variable, and it was a 50 grand loan, and I just focused on paying that down and just paid it, and then did it again and just kept going until because you can't, you know, also a lot of the time when you've got a big debt, it's overwhelming when it's a large number, isn't it? So if you actually create it into a smaller number that we can psychologically and on a human behavior level deal with, then you're going to concentrate and focus a bit more and be able to put your money into the right direction. So
100%. There's two schools of thought when it comes to paying off debt, and they're called snowball and avalanche methods. And what you're talking about there is the snowball, which is you concentrate on paying off the smaller debts first so that you feel like you're making progress and you've got that psychological reward each time you clear a debt. The other method is avalanche. Now, this is better mathematically and financially, which is you pay off the highest interest bearing loan first and then work your way down. But the problem with that one is, as you say, let's say you've got a huge debt that you want to be paying off first, and then you've got a bunch of small debts. You're going to be working for years and feel like you're actually getting nowhere. So depending on which your approach is, if you need that dopaminergic motivation, which I often do with a lot of things, then yes, start with the snowball method. Just clear the smaller ones first so it feels less overwhelming. And once you've cleared a few, you will believe in yourself that you can continue to pay off the rest.
Right. So in that sense, if you say, for example, had a home loan and you had a credit card debt, then pay off the credit card debt first and then start focusing on the home loan, as an example. Or if you had a car loan or something like that.
So typically your credit card debt, the interest rate on that one would be higher than your mortgage anyway. So definitely be looking to clear that one off, because not only is it the smaller debt, it's also the highest interest bearing. One of the things actually, and I don't want to just come on the podcast and plug the course the whole time. But one of the things I put into the course is a debt calculator where you can put in all of your debts, the size they are, the repayment dates, and the interest rates. And then you can choose between Snowball and Avalanche, and it will calculate for you what you should pay and when. And you can obviously look at what it would look like going forward and then make your choices there.
Fascinating.
Wow, it's amazing. This is, the way you're explaining it, it's so simple, and more people just need to hear it. When you talked about the stocks and the investment earlier, it just reminded me of my son. My son is 18. He just started university a few weeks back, and he is an avid stock market player. He's already investing. He's had some pretty good wins. And he's pretty committed. He wakes up really early before class to check the market to see how his projections and forecasting has gone. And he's had days where he'll text going, "Oh my gosh, I made like $1,000 today," or "I made like $2,000." And it's that's because he's interested, not because he was exposed to it because of his curriculum. And this is something I think that schools, like the education system, just needs to change. They need to incorporate more of the real world and teach kids how to invest, what all these words mean, like compounded interest and all these other definitions. They need to know what these things are, so when they're forced to go out into the world, they have some base level knowledge of how to function as an adult and what your options are, instead of just going straight from college to debt, which is unfortunately what most of us have had to go through, right? So you're already giving us a great
100%.
foundation.
Yeah, I think
And
by the time that people go looking for it, it's because they've had something in their life that's meant they've had to. So hopefully that means they've received a load of inheritance and they know that they shouldn't just go and blow that up the wall. But quite often it starts with debt, and it's because they don't understand the compounding interest of debt as well, because it works both ways. They end up in a huge debt hole and then realize they need to understand finance, but they're starting from such a handicap at that point. So your son sounds like he's going to be incredibly successful, and he's very lucky, and you're very lucky that he's got a passion and a habit that is going to be leading him to long-term growth.
agreed. I just hope it doesn't detract from his actual studies because he's so motivated on watching the stock market and playing. But no, he's actually very self-motivated, so I'll give him credit for that.
Good on him.
Speaking of which, so you talked a little bit about some already. You've given us some great tips on how to invest and how to kind of cut your debt down. But something bigger that I think would be really important for our listeners to hear, especially, is the idea of financial stability. And I know this is something that you probably have a lot to share on. So, from your perspective, what really is financial stability? What does it really entail? And, what are some, practical ways that we all can reach that place?
Sure. So I think financial stability, or the next level from that, which is financial freedom, they're all personal to you, right? Because everyone will live in different countries with different costs of living and different interest rates on their bank loans and so on. And they'll also have different goals and what they want to achieve. So I'd say for stability, as a first point of view, so I'll talk you through the financial hierarchy, actually, which again was another one of the modules. So think of a pyramid. And for those of you who went to university and learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it talks about what you need in life. And you start with the necessities, which is food, sleep, and water. And you need to have that ticked off before you can then worry about social life and everything else. But then social life is obviously more important than just fun and games up at the top. So what it's implying is you need to have the most important things first before you can level up and build the others. So the first level of financial stability is being able to put food on the table, put a roof over your head, and pay the bills. So if your income isn't enough to cover those bare necessities, then your first point of call needs to be, how can I get more income? That can be getting a qualification on the side, educating yourself. There's lots of free resources out there to pick up new skills, but that should be your priority at that point. If that's ticked off and you then have surplus income, the next thing you should be looking at is protection. Protection so that if something happens to my health, because we all get sick at some point, to make sure that that's not going to set you all the way back to the start. So things like your health cover, having an emergency fund in place. So if you have a rainy day, you need money for your family or something like that, then you have that in place. Once the emergency fund is there, we've now got the protective base, and that's what I would call financial stability.
So the
Um,
fundamentals in that area, yeah.
Sorry?
Like the fundamentals that you need to kind of start base from before you can even
Exactly.
level up. Yeah.
Yeah. So once you've got those bases in place, then the next thing you would look towards is your financial freedom or flexibility. Financial freedom is a bit of a corny catchphrase, but what it implies is that money isn't a constraint to you doing what you want to do. So that's where you would look at your investing. That's where you would look at getting your pensions in place that you'd be able to retire when you want to. And then once you've got all of those in place, then at the top, you can start looking at your legacy planning, which is like, okay, I've got more than enough to cater for what I want in life. Now I want to pass as much on to my kids, to my family, to charity as I want. So yeah, it goes in those orders.
Right. That makes total sense. I mean, also like just going back to your point about, we're not taught in schools really about money at all. We're taught maths, but we're not taught about money or finance or economics or anything like that. And I think also particularly as women, like I'm generalizing here, but a lot of women don't actually have financial knowledge because they get married when they're quite young and they rely on their husbands to do that. I've got too many of my friends actually tell me that they don't know the finances in their family unit, and I'm shocked by that because I'm like, well, what if he leaves you? You have no idea where the money is. And like, not saying that that's going to happen, but for me, I would never let that happen to me because I need to know that, as you say, to your point about Maslow's hierarchy of need, I need to know that I'm safe, secure, and I can be fed and I can pay the bills. And if someone else is in charge of the cash, I've got no knowledge. You're almost not free in that sense. So for a lot of women, I think, we kind of just have this lack of knowledge, this lack of information, because we're also not encouraged, I guess, too much to go into those fields either, right? CC, am I right?
Correct.
Yeah.
You are 100% right. I was just going to say that historically speaking, and again, the tide is changing now, but historically, women were never encouraged to pursue fields, that fall into STEM or science, technology, engineering, and math.
Mm,
And, often we're encouraged to go into the humanities or the arts, teaching, being a therapist, a social worker.
mm,
Working in finance or working on Wall Street as a stockbroker is not something you would have really seen women to be encouraged to pursue. So 100% right there with you, Rachel. We're not really encouraged to pursue that area. So it feels kind of gray. We're not really sure. You might get married and leave all that stuff up to your husband. So there's a lot of grayness happening,
yeah.
especially with women. So that's why we thought it was perfect for you to come on here and just, speak to our audience and
Mm,
empower everyone to say no, change that narrative. You don't have to, just because society has told you that doesn't mean you have to, keep that as, a part of your life. You can, change that and redefine it. So that's
yeah.
why this particular topic is so important for women. And
Yeah.
as you talk about reaching that, higher level tier of financial freedom, that's something that I think, okay, irrespective of male, female, whatever it is, everyone wants that, right? And then how do you go about to attaining it is something else. And we're only taught to spend. We live in a consumer economy, a
Mhm.
consumerism world. We are, really, killing ourselves with consumerism. So
Yeah.
is there so question where that credit card debt with the high interest rates are coming from? And
Yeah.
people don't know how to stop shopping more than what your paycheck can afford.
Well, I
That
think a
seems
lot
to
of
be
people don't actually
very
know where their
difficult.
cash flow goes, like you talk to people and they've never done their own personalized budgets. And what I actually did this a few years ago when I was saving to buy a house. And I realized just how much money I was spending on stuff I just didn't even know where it was going. And so, there
Right.
is that issue too. So Thomas, I know that you've kind of touched on it a bit about the program you're putting together and what you're doing now. You've got your podcast. What how is that kind of accessible to, people, like for our listeners, like what can they expect from that? What kind of thing, how is it going to help them? So plug away. Tell us more.
Sure. So on the budgeting front, that's again another thing that's going to be in there. There is a budgeting tool that you can put everything in, and it will help you understand what's going in versus what's going out, and also the future trajectory of that. I do want to jump in on what you two were talking about women historically not being involved in the finances. And it's not even just historically. Even today, over 40% of married women say that they have no idea about the finances and the husband handles all of it. Now, that's not just a problem in the sense that they don't have the understanding. It's also builds a dependency, which, as you say, if then anything goes wrong, they end up completely screwed.
Yeah.
Even if you use a wealth manager or a financial advisor, it's still important that you have a basic understanding yourself. Because if you don't know the basics, you are going to be so easy to be taken advantage of. And there are so many, I mean, I see YouTube ads all the time, and I can tell within 2 seconds that it's a scam and it's a get rich quick scheme. And I think, how the hell do people fall for this and have YouTube not taken it down? But it's because people don't understand that the complete financial basics of the premise they're selling are false. So, and if you go to work with a financial advisor, I'm speaking as someone who's in the industry. Sales is a big part of the job. Like, if you meet someone and they've got a lot of money, you have to convince them to trust you with their money. So there is a huge element of sales in it. If you don't understand anything about finance and you approach a financial advisor saying, "Can you help me?" and they have a less than fantastic moral standing, as a lot of them do. Like, my industry has historically been full with pirates that will put you in the highest paying funds possible to make the most money out of you possible. So if you don't have at least a good understanding of what you should be paying and what returns you should be seeing, you are opening yourself up to be taken advantage of. So yeah, even if you have a husband that deals with everything, even if you have a financial advisor, you owe it to yourself to at least educate yourself on the basic fundamentals to make sure that you don't get taken advantage of in the future. You asked about the podcast. So the podcast is unrelated to finance. It's a non-profit thing for me. It's just a passion project. Because, as I say, when I was 25 and I had what I call my quarter life crisis, I found podcasts helped me through quite a lot. I felt like there were people speaking about deep conversations that I wasn't able to find people in my own life to have, and talk about topics that were really important that never came up in everyday conversation. So I love it. I love listening to two really intelligent people talk and feeling like I'm part of that conversation. And I actually wanted to start it about 2-3 years ago, but I was a bit of a chicken because I didn't have a social media following, and I thought it would be so hard to build it from the ground up that I put it on the back burner. And then Juria obviously came along and catapulted me to some internet, I wouldn't say fame, but notoriety.
Oh, and
oh yes.
Those videos are amazing. And actually, you're right there. It is good to have like a platform to go from. Sorry to interrupt you there, but like, you're starting it. We've started this podcast for similar kind of reason that you did, excuse me, that, we wanted to have the conversations that people were having, separately, like on the side, but actually have them out in the open so that people could hear them, and we could like offer some advice and some help and some tips on that. But we don't have social media presences. So one of the reasons I wanted to get you on was like, well, he's going to have a big following of women that are going to be interested in the subjects we're talking about. So hopefully that we can grab some of your audience in that sense. But yeah,
exactly.
I'm glad you did it, because I have listened to some of your episodes, and you've got some really, really out there, like good topics, stuff that probably a man of your age perhaps wouldn't talk about with other women. So I found that really fascinating and super, super interesting that you would do something like that. It's very different. So well done on that.
Thank you. I'm sure the perimenopause episode was what led you to say that. And you're right, like, in what
did.
world would what world would a
Out in the open.
30-year-old man sit down with a stranger in her 40s and talk about perimenopause for an hour, right? But the podcast gives you that environment to do it. And I had no idea. Like, that episode was complete news to me. And it was quite even a lot of women that followed the episode as well. So yeah, that was a real testament to me that I was heading in the right direction when I had that episode, and I left it thinking, wow, I've actually learned quite a lot, and that's going to change how I interact with women in my life going forward as well. So yeah,
Oh,
really good.
that is really important work that you're doing, because as a man, you've got to lead the way on that kind of conversation.
Mhm.
And especially a man of your age, because, you know, obviously more and more women are getting into those high level executive positions. And we get there in our late 40s. And that's when we hit that perimenopause, that menopausal stage of our lives. And there's, you know, there's nothing you can do about it. It's human nature. But also it comes with a plethora of problems and situations and things you have to deal with. And if other men don't understand it, it's really hard to navigate. So I'm really, really proud of you actually for doing that and making that, being a bit of a thought leader in that kind of space. So yeah, good on you.
Yeah, and
Thank you, Rachel.
just to
Appreciate it.
have the bravery to even to go down that track. I mean, now that you have that awareness, I'm sure that you're sharing that with your peers and just giving them sort of the inside scoop of, hey man, this is really how it is. You have to, like this is the kind of mindset you have to understand, because this is all about managing relationships, right? So if you could understand what a woman at that level is experiencing, it must make it a little bit easier to deal with, especially the clients that you get and all the different clients that you potentially will get and will get in the future, right? So I think it's helpful all the way around.
Yeah.
100%. I think it didn't take much. It took an hour conversation, but I'm probably now in the top 1% most educated men on perimenopause on the planet, just because the other 99% know nothing, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I was part of that group. And one of the things that really shocked me about it was women themselves think that they have until their 40s or 50s until they have to worry about menopause, but perimenopause can set in as early as your early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
women wouldn't even think of that as a cause for what they were feeling or what was changing in their bodies at that point. And it took Frankie, and I guess it took her years to work out what it was that was going on. And the worst part of everything that was happening, she didn't understand why. Her brain must have been going to every nook and cranny,
Yeah.
imagining anything that could be wrong with her. And all it was the natural aging process. So as soon as that was realized, then obviously it takes a whole lot of mental stress away, and you then have the facilities and the knowledge out there to deal with it.
Yeah, we don't have it easy, us women. You know what I mean? Like we do go through a lot from a physical sense, and also like from a mental health sense as well, because we are hormonally charged and our hormones are always going up and down. And I think, it's very easy to be labeled as various things as a woman. In the workplace, you're crazy, she's a bit unhinged, or all of these things. But I think you just need to get a wider perspective and understanding, because as you say, a lot of women don't even know this information. They don't understand
Right.
perimenopause, and you do have to understand it, because all sorts of things happen to you and you're like, I don't know what's happening to me. And so, yeah, it's good that you're highlighting this issue. Perhaps it's something we need to talk about a bit more as well,
I
Cece.
was
Yeah.
just thinking that, as you said, as the words flew out of your mouth, I was thinking, oh, we need to make this an episode.
We do.
Being that's where we are physically. No, this has been really great. I think, you've plugged a little bit, throughout talking about the course that you have, but I think, when we think about a message we want to send to our listeners and maybe some practical advice, for someone who is just starting out and wants to invest and is looking to really build wealth over the long term, what piece of advice can you really offer?
That's such a good question, because one of the things that I get quite a lot is, how do I start investing? And it's very hard to know what to do. And again, if you don't already have an understanding and you go looking on the internet for information, it's so easy to end up down the wrong hole and end up on some Forex trading platform or something like that, being like, this is how you invest. What I would say is, if you're just getting started with investing and you've covered off those bottom two foundations of the pyramid, so you've got an emergency fund in place and you've got the protection that you need, and you can cover your expenses, and you have then the disposable to start investing. There are multiple asset classes. There's real estate, there's stocks and shares, fixed interest securities, cash alternatives, and so on. I would look for a diversified portfolio, and one that is managed by a large company for you. For example, there's Vanguard, BlackRock, some of the biggest companies in the world, and they do what are called lifestyle strategies, which means the attitude to risk is assigned to you based on your age. The portfolio is diversified across multiple asset classes, and it will reduce in risk as you get older. So you can find some of those and set up on a platform. Again, I can't really recommend a platform because it depends where you are in the world, what your tax situation is, and so on. If you're in the US, you've got your IRAs, which should be generally one of the first things that you look at. If you're in the UK, then ISAs are one of the more common things. There's also pension funds, which you can get tax relief by putting into if you're investing for the long term. And then when you're in there, just make sure that you're in a diversified fund that's spreading across everything. What it sounds like your son is doing is what's called bottom-up analysis, which is where he looks at stocks and looks at their books and works out if their price is undervalued or not, and then he invests in them, anticipating what's going to happen with those. The general approach I would advise to anyone that isn't looking to make it a full-time job or a passion which they spend hours a day on is pick a fund that is just diversified and be in it for the long term, because if you're in the market for the long term, historically, it has always continued upwards. And one of the graphs that I love, and unfortunately don't have it to hand, is the stock market ever since its conception, over 150 years ago. And it continues upwards, but it plots every world disaster on there. So World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, every war, all the way up to COVID. And every time that happens, there's a little dip, and then it continues upwards. So time in the market is superior to trying to time the market. And if you're thinking, I reckon, we're about to have a boost for the next week, you might be right, you might be wrong. If you're in there for 10 years, 20 years, historically, that has always proved to be right. So just look to be in there for as long as possible.
Yeah, compounds over time, doesn't it? I suppose. It's a long game, not, it's a marathon, not a sprint, as saying goes. Thomas, this has been a really amazing chat with you. Super fascinating, super interesting. It's good to hear your story, how you've gone from a wealth manager just minding his own business to suddenly becoming a TikTok sensation, and hearing your passion as well and everything that you're doing, not just from the wealth management perspective, but also in that kind of, personal development, which you're obviously really passionate about too. And I'm sure everybody's got a lot out of this conversation we've had today. So how can our listeners find you and, maybe engage with your course? What's the best way for them to do that?
Of course. So best way is probably on Instagram. My Instagram is Tom G. Murr. And the course will be coming out next month. It was meant to come out this month, but I bit off way more than I could chew, and it was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so it will be out next month. It's currently going through the final stages of video editing now.
I think it'll be out by the time this podcast goes live. So hopefully,
most likely, yes,
it'll time out nicely, because this will go live in November, will it?
Towards the end of November.
End of November, yeah. So
perfect. Then yes, the course better be live at that point. Otherwise, I'll be living under a rock somewhere.
Okay, well, if you want to find that course, I guess go to your Instagram and you'll have a link there or something like that.
I will, yeah.
Yeah, Tom GMURR Instagram, and of course go to Thomas's Growth Game podcast if you want to hear him talk about perimenopause. I would if I was.
Perfect.
He is now
Thanks so much for having me.
No worries, Tom. It's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Cece.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. As we wrap up, what is one key takeaway you got from our guest, Thomas, that will make a difference for you today? As always, if you like this episode, we would be so grateful if you could share it with your friends and tag us on social media at Leading Ladies Who Lunch. Your reviews of this podcast mean so much to us. We'd love it if you could rate it and subscribe to the show.
Remember, you can find us and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. Subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes, and follow us on Instagram at Leading Ladies Who Lunch.
Tune in 2 weeks for another great episode.
Until then, stay sassy.
Thank you for joining us on the empowering journey at the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our insightful discussions, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories that we break down during each episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Leading Ladies Who Lunch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And remember, the conversations you've heard on this podcast are just the beginning of your journey. Let your voice be heard, inspire change, and continue breaking barriers as you lead with authenticity, resilience, and unwavering determination.
Until next time, keep embracing your leadership potential, challenging the norms, and shaping a better world for women in the workplace. Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, changing lives.